Let's look at some of the potential criticisms of the muscular Christianity, right? People would say, well, hey, man, like, you're supposed to be meek. You're supposed to be humble. You know, Jesus was meek and humble. There's a passage that says, like, he wasn't much to look at. I'm paraphrasing, right? And so how would you respond to some of those ideas of like, be meek, be humble, don't be powerful, don't be strong, because look at Jesus.
Yeah, so there's actually a large portion of my book on that. Actually, it's about how how we view power, how we view humility, how we view charity. Yeah, so fitness actually can make you it works on your temperance, right? When you like basketball, for example, requires a kind of finesse where you can't just like throw the ball as hard as you can at the rim and then hope it goes in. You know, you got to like have a soft touch, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it'll teach you to not just have power, but to harness that in the correct way. So from a quite literal standpoint, that's part of it. A lot of it is about being weak and being meek and being small. That way, God can shine a lot more. So
good.
in a sense, it's sort of like all the verses ostensibly telling you to be weak are counterbalanced by telling you like by highlighting how much stronger you are with God.
Yes.
So that's another thing I would say. And then also about like, being humble and being and another criticism I get is like, okay, this is sort of goes against the principles of charity, right? Because you're just oppressing someone. You have to actively beat them down, as opposed to the Bible where it talks about bringing people up.
Wait. I'm not tracking that criticism. How is you developing, or is it you talking about the sports aspect?
The sports aspects of it.
Because if you're becoming successful at sports, you're defeating someone.
Yeah,
and that's not charitable.
I think that it's sort of rooted in their idea of charity that you're bringing people up. That's why I mentioned charity.
Okay.
So, yeah, a lot of I've heard that quite a bit where you're putting someone down in order to bring yourself up. Well, first of all, this is like a game at sports. It's not exactly the same thing as like like social inequalities or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's much different. And second of all, you actually do, in some sense, if you have some kind of spiritual inclination towards good, you actually can bring people up through sports, right? Because when competition brings both people to a higher level of competence than they otherwise would have been. You can you can work by yourself, you can train by yourself, you can work on your shots by yourself and everything. But if you don't go up against other people, then you're just not going to be as good.
That's really good. You said competition brings both people up to a higher level of competence.
Yeah.
And what's the benefit of that?
So if the goal is self-improvement, it is to push your limits and see how far you can get and become better, then you need competition to actually reach your maximum potential in that sense. There's even in your spiritual life, and some degree of competition and some degree of like, hey, I want to do this because me and my friend are having this competition to see you could do that. That could probably be good. That's another thing I would say. What was another criticism you mentioned?
The criticism about vanity is going to come up, right? If you're like, hey man, you should get shredded, it gets sub 20% body fat, sub 15% body fat, and someone's like, well, why? Because you just want to look good and you want to be vain. That's going to come up.
That's definitely a critique. So what I would say to that is that, I will acknowledge the fact that yes, it obviously can become a vain pursuit if you are doing it just to look good and using your looks as a means to just like flaunt over other people. That's definitely a vain, something vain. But the people have been admiring the human figure for decades. If you look at the Greeks, they have a whole word for it actually, about moral perfection and physical beauty. So these things can actually go together. They thought it went together. The Greeks thought it went together. The word is called kalokagathia. I mentioned in my book a few times. It is moral perfection and moral beauty and physical beauty in symbiosis. So these two aren't exactly, they aren't mutually exclusive, right?
That's good.
And they can actually work together. And if you have the right mindset when you're going into it, it can actually be enlivening. It can be enlivening for yourself in your physical and spiritual life, because the physical and spiritual are connected.
Yeah, they're connected, and I think that they should be redeemed and acknowledged more that they're connected, because what's happened, I think, in society is that some of these ideas have been forfeited, specifically the idea of beauty, goodness, right, excellence. So then the world takes them, corrupts them, manipulates them, and uses them to hurt people, right? Yeah. So if you're talking about the beauty of the human body, we don't got to look any further than what we're seeing with adult content, how pervasive it is. That's literally taking something that's good and beautiful, and it's being perverted and distorted to hurt people and to damage people, right? And so it's like if Christians aren't accurately assessing beauty, goodness, virtue, and connecting it as an overflow of the spiritual, then the world's going to hijack it and continue distorting it to hurt people and harm people. Yeah. How about this criticism? Muscular Christianity can create a overemphasis on the physical and at the expense of spiritual depth. So people who are really into physical fitness don't necessarily go deeper with, their spiritual depth, and then that can create a distorted view of Christianity where, physical strength and success are mistaken as spiritual maturity, as spiritual indicators. Because there's a lot of people that aren't physically fit, but they could still be spiritually mature.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a part of that is that's a warranted criticism, right? You could be caring more about the physicality than the spirituality.
Yeah.
Whereas, I think the body and the soul and the mind are connected, right? Mm-hmm. If you're physically well, they're going to be mentally well. If you're like fasting, for example, actually increases your testosterone. There's actually some studies about that, which is pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you're spiritually well, then your mental health can be better. So there's some correlation between them. But of course, they aren't exactly the same. I acknowledge that in my book. The first 3 paragraphs, something like that I mentioned in my book, like they aren't exactly the same, but they're correlated. And if you had to choose one, you should definitely choose the spirit over it every single time, every day of the week. Mm-hmm. Just like how all the Christian martyrs did. They decided, hey, we're gonna get rid of my body, but you can't take over my soul, right? There's even a Bible verse even about that, actually. Mm-hmm. If someone shouldn't be able to destroy your soul, but they can destroy your body. Mm-hmm. Jesus says something like that.
Yeah, fear the one that can do both.
Yeah,
yeah, in hell. Yeah.
There is definitely a worry about that. There's definitely a risk in that. Mm-hmm. But if you do it, my point is that you should be doing it with the right mindset. You should be doing it with a soul that is ordered towards the right things. And if it's not ordered towards the right things, then just like anything else, it can become corrupted. Money can become corrupted. I guess the Bible also talks about money a lot and how it can corrupt people. Mm-hmm. Sexual beauty can become corrupted with money. Mm-hmm. All sorts of great things can become corrupted. I think there's some smart person out there that says something like, the greater something is, the worse it is when it's corrupted.
That's good.
So the greater your body is, the greater your strength is, the worse it is when it's corrupted. So you just have to very much keep a spiritual life intact. You got to keep your spiritual you got to make sure your spirit is very much inclined towards that goodness, towards mm-hmm. that towards the goodness. And if it is, then I think that physical fitness can be a way to amplify your ability to promote the gospel. Like I was saying before, when you have physical strength, you have some kind of spiritual strength, mm-hmm. you have some kind of social power, mm-hmm. and you can bring more people to the Christ. And that's one of the main parts I talk about in my book, actually. So I think that if you do it with the right intentions, then it can be good. But because, I guess technically with my quote, right, because it's so good, it can be so easily corrupted. Mm-hmm. And that's something you got to be very much worried about.
Yeah.
But it's just something like, okay, there's going to be, like, power exists, right? Power is going to exist. It's this amorphous substance that's going to exist. Mm-hmm. So we have to choose whether we want people who are inclined towards the good to have it, or we want people that are bad to have it. And
yeah, well, again, it goes back to Christians fleeting the institutions, fleeting the aspects of the natural world, because they're afraid of power, they're afraid of beauty, or they're afraid of art, they're afraid of music. It's a pretty consistent, pattern that we've seen, unfortunately, probably more so within the last 100 years of Christians, like being afraid of these things instead of seeing these things as they exist and they should be used by Christians to do good. Here's another critique. Muscular Christianity can create an elitist undertone, right? Meaning that when there's the potential for the powerful, for those who have access, for those who have resources to accumulate said resources, it can alienate those of a lower socioeconomic class. So I'll give you a very practical example. I have a gym in my backyard. I'll show it to you. I think it's pretty fire. You tell me what you think about it. So I got everything I need here. Like, I don't have to go to a gym. I don't have to do anything but walk a few steps. And some days, I'll do my morning walk. I'll do my 45 to 60 minutes of cardio. I'll do my 30 to 60 minutes of strength training. Like, these are my normal days. But I'm in an extremely fortunate position to be able to afford to have a gym on my property. I'm in an extremely fortunate position to be able to have the flexibility to do these things because I don't have to be at a regular 9 to 5, right? And so my biggest challenge is like, I like when I strength train, I want to eat more food, and it's hard for me to be in a deficit to get under 20% body fat. And like that's my challenge is like it's like really, really, really first world problems. And so if we're talking about like Christianity always historically being an advocate for the poor, for the marginalized, to help be the hands and feet of Jesus for the least of these, how do you think muscular Christianity fits into that equation, right? Like in potentially creating elitist undertones where we can kind of look down upon people who don't have the same flexibility in their schedule, the same access to gym and nutritious food.
Yeah. So there definitely is a sort of like muscular Christianity is a very first world idea, right? Like why would someone living in, I don't know, someone who's very poor, low class, can't afford a gym, can't afford any of this stuff. They're trying to eat food.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why would they care about your my developing muscles and playing sports, right? So this is very much a first world kind of Christianity. I recognize that.
Yeah.
Does it create a sort of people that are sort of looking down on the poor? I mean, perhaps it could. That's certainly, it's not a critique I've heard too much, but it is something that could happen. Like with money, with power in general, you sort of lose your perspective. You're sort of prone to losing your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So what I actually like to do in, I recommend this in my book actually, is that I like to fast for religious reasons. And when you fast, you sort of start to take on a sort of a lower class sort of mindset. You start to think of, wow, food is amazing. God has created these wonderful, nutritious meals for us to eat. It's amazing. And it sort of makes you, it very much humbles you in that sense. And, you know, it even goes back to your fitness, right? Because I talked before about how fasting can actually improve your testosterone. So in a sense, it actually even could help you in the long run. So I think fasting is one of the ways that you can stay humble in your pursuit to muscular Christianity. It can, you're willingly telling yourself that there are other things more important than your immediate physical development. And that sort of puts you in the perspective of those who are poor. I mean, Jesus said that he had though having all the power in the world, he chose to live like one of us, right? So in fasting, we are in a somewhat of a sense doing the same thing where we are going without something that we need, something that is good, in order to reestablish our commitment to God and to humble ourselves before God and before other people.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. What's the longest you fasted before?
Longest I fasted, I think I've gone 3 days without food.
Just water, or are you doing
just water? Yeah,
just water.
Yeah,
pretty hard.
Yeah, it's pretty. I found it really hard. Like the first day, I was like, man, I really hate this.
Yeah.
But like the second day wasn't that hard. And okay, I did this during Easter, right? So it was like Good Friday, I didn't eat. Saturday, I didn't eat, and then Sunday morning, I ate. So I guess it's like 2.5 days if you really want to be technical about it.
Sure.
But first day was extremely difficult. Second day, for some reason, just wasn't as hard. I was like, oh yeah, I can do this. Yeah. And then third day, for some reason, I was just really hungry again, and then I ate. So I don't know, maybe it's different for different people, but
yeah.
it's very much something that I just got more used to as it went on.
Yeah, I love that. I love fasting as an antidote for sliding into elitism and pride. I think that's really, really helpful, and I think a practical takeaway. We're going to go over to our Patreon exclusive segment. We're going to have a conversation with my man Paul about something that's a little too spicy for YouTube. I want to specifically get into, does he think there's an intentional feminization of men happening in culture? Where is this sort of stuff coming from? And some of the other topics are going to be discussed. Take a look at this here. Do you think there's a calculated effort to try and make men more feminine in this culture?
Men created these structures and these formations in society that were so durable that they sort of made themselves, like the fact that people are sort of, for lack of a better word, like overcompensating in a sense with Andrew Tate and then becoming like actually toxic.
What final like words of advice would you have for men that, you know, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, they're trying to figure it out? Where would you tell them to start?
Ruslan